Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Hey, today I'm giving an update on Aphrodite, my ball python. She's actually about 1.25 years old now, and she is way bigger than she used to be. I can hold her out. So, yeah, she is doing really well. It's funny, I still have the deli cup she came in, and at this point she is almost as wide. I mean, it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I mean, you couldn't fit like her body side by side in this deli cup. It is kind of striking, because they only grow a tiny bit each day, and so it's kind of amazing how big she's gotten. And so in terms of pattern too, interestingly, she's still a very bright and vibrant yellow. What's interesting, she's a firefly. That is to say, she's got the fire mutation, a single copy thereof, and a single copy of the pastel mutation. So she's got the characteristic green eyes, the slightly, the lightened forehead there of the pastel, and she's got a nice sort of vibrant yellow. Although one of the things that's kind of interesting about her vibrant yellow is the fact that, like, if the lights are bright, it tends to look like a much more washed out, very light colored yellow. There is some dependence on the particular light. I don't know if you are familiar with how light exactly works, but we only have red, green, and blue receptors in our eyes. And so depending on what bounces off of an object, it excites the red, green, and blue receptors in differing amounts. And so we can tell what color it is based upon how much each of the red, green, and blue receptors are excited. Now, things like LED lights, fluorescent lights, they don't emit all of the wavelengths of light. They emit some very specific wavelengths of light that may bounce. So they tend to emit red, green, and blue. And better ones will have several reds and several greens and several blues, so that, like, some of those will be in the yellow and orange and purples and etc. colors. And so, because the thing is, the pigments, like the yellow pigment in the snake, primarily reflects, reflect yellow. It will reflect some red, it will reflect some green, but it reflects a lot of yellow. And if you're only getting red and you're only getting green, you may not actually get very much of, neither of them will reflect as much as yellow would from the snake. So, for example, like a yellowish light shows her off a lot better, not because everything looks yellow under yellow, but yellow things will reflect yellow much better than they reflect green and green and red. Yellow, by the way, is in between green and red. If you look in the frequency spectrum, yellow's in between, and so yellow excites our red receptor and our green receptor kind of equally, somewhat. And when they get excited in that way, that looks yellow to us. But the thing is, so like a computer monitor only emits red, green, and blue, and it produces all of the colors by just varying the amount because it matches the photoreceptors in our eyes. However, when you've got something that reflects like this, it may not reflect in the same degree as the colors should be, and so that's why, like in sunlight or incandescent light, that's where you get all the spectrum. But even in sunlight, she looks a bit washed out. What's kind of interesting is if you look at her in relatively dim lighting, that is when she looks astonishingly yellow. She just has this almost like in lower amounts of light, she almost glows. She doesn't literally glow, obviously, but her yellows are just so much more vibrant and intense in moderate lighting, and in really bright lighting, she gets more washed out. It's not just a more bright form of the lesser thing. So it's kind of funny, but she looks her best in like dim incandescent lighting, and then she is just astonishingly yellow. That said, for a 1-year-old, she's kept her, she's still got very clean sides. Her back is starting to get a bit of speckling in it, and I do expect it to turn darker. That's kind of normal, and they also get more yellow on the pastels, get more yellow on the sides, turn darker up at top. But she has a very clean pattern for a fire pastel, and so I'm really looking forward to seeing as she grows up. So yeah. Also, a few interesting things I've learned about her over time. She really loves burrows. So obviously ball pythons like to hide, but what I've got essentially it's bioactive, though not the sort. It's like not swampy bioactive, like the sort of thing where people have like the drainage layer with the beads underneath and so on. I do have a fairly thick layer, and I keep it from turning into a swamp by just not putting that much water into it, because it's not meant to be like a damp forest. And I've got live plants in there and so on, springtails. I'm going to be putting isopods in at some point, and I've got primarily coconut fiber, with a few other things, some activated charcoal and so on for the springtails. And because that's about 3 to 4 inches deep, I actually at one point made a burrow for her where I just put I'd actually put a piece of wood, and this actually came about because the hide wasn't, the cool side wasn't quite as cool as I wanted it to be, so I actually dug down a bit, and she absolutely loved it. She loved it, like that feeling of going down into the thing. She spent so much time there. And so I was actually starting to wonder that like she was spending like almost, except for when she would eat, she would spend almost all her time in the cold hide. And I had hides over on the warm side of the enclosure too. But she's spending all her time in the cold hide. And so I went and made a burrow on the other side. The way I make the burrows, I make a depression and then I put like a tile, or wooden board, tile, anything like that. It's basically level with the surrounding ground on it. And so and then I have, a hole that goes in. So from the side, she has to go down into it and is underneath where she had been. And so I still had other hides in there as well. But once she had a warm burrow and a cold burrow, she just wouldn't go in any other hide. She'd either be in the warm burrow or the cold burrow, and that's it. I mean, at nighttime she'll come out and go around her cage, and she even climbs. I've got a 4-foot LED fixture. It looks like a fluorescent shop light, but it's LEDs. So it's 4 foot. It's a 5-foot long enclosure. There's a hanging 4-foot LED light. At night, she likes to come out and go and climb on top of that and go around on top and then come back down off of it. Fairly late at night, and so like she does come out and explore and stuff at night because they are, after all, nocturnal animals. But man, does she love her burrows. She just really, really, really loves those burrows. As I said, I eventually stopped bothering with other hides because I literally, once I had a warm burrow and a cold burrow, I literally never found her in anything but a burrow. Now, there may be some difference, too, between males and females in this regard. I've read that male ball pythons are more likely to climb and hunt in trees, whereas females tend to be much more terrestrial. They get bigger and they tend to focus more primarily on like rodents and stuff. I don't know for sure. Just sort of mentioning, it's not guaranteed all ball pythons will love burrows, but something very interesting to try if you have enough substrate is to make a burrow. It was especially good too for the cold burrow because being lower down, and since heat rises, it helped me to get the temperature I was looking for in the cool side, so she could really definitely escape the heat. And since on the hot side, because I actually use slate. I bought, from Home Depot, I bought some slates in the tile section, bought 2 of them, and then glued them together using silicone. And so it makes a nice, big, heavy top. But since that's also on the hot side, that heats up, and the rock heats up, and so that keeps that aspect, or the burrow on the hot side, nice and warm, without being too hot. So the temperatures are nice and dialed in, and obviously I made sure that. Anyway, and the point being that, like, wow, does she love burrows. So if you got the opportunity for a ball python, I really recommend trying it and seeing, because at least she loves burrows. And the other thing is burrows. It is so ludicrously easy to maintain the right humidity and shedding, because burrows being down in the substrate, they just naturally hold humidity really, really well. So so what I tend to do is like when she's just starting to go into shed, I just like I'll pour like a tiny bit of water into the burrow. Basically, make sure to water around. As I said, I've got live plants. So I do water periodically, and it keeps the humidity up generally. But right around shed time, I'll make a point of just like watering the burrow just a little bit, and that will hold humidity so incredibly well for several days while she's shedding, without having the overall area being super humid. And as a bone, since I have springtails in there, springtails, one of the things they really eat is mold, so that even especially helps. Like I have never had any mold problems, whatever. The other thing is, because I only do this when she's going into shed, it's always at a decently high humidity and then gets to a super high humidity right when she's in shed, but then dries out a bit. So it never is in like a super humid conditions for more than 3-4 days. So mold doesn't have a chance to actually like really set in before the conditions aren't so good for it anymore. And then, as I said, the springtails too really help because, of course, springtails eat mold. So it's those burrows have worked out really, really well. One other thing that has worked out really well, I've got a 5-foot front opening enclosure that I've built, and it's got 2 doors. And so what I've taken to doing ever since she was very little, so I feed at night. I make a point for nocturnal snakes. I feed them at night, like once the lights in their enclosure go off, but not the other lights. Because I've got them on a timer, they go off at 8 o'clock. So I always feed after 8 o'clock. There's a secondary benefit because this way I handle the snake throughout the day, and then, at night when I wouldn't really be handling them anyway, that's when I take them out of commission. And then sort of there's only one other day. The next day I mostly don't handle them. Every once in a while, you have to handle a snake just a tiny bit for some reason, but for the most part, just then leave them alone the next day, and this way they get 2 nights in one day, and they're always fine the next day. So it sort of maximizes the amount I get to be around them. But so it's also a very recognizable thing that like once the lights go off, then maybe they'll get fed. And the next thing too is I've made a point actually, because on one side I've got a few heat pads. And 2 of them are sort of radiant heat, and one of them is lying flat. And it's that kind of panel that's made in Scotland that it's very it's designed in such a way that it's got it doesn't pass very much current through. It doesn't generate a ton of heat, so they can actually, as long as they don't 100% cover it, they can lay down on top of it and they can't burn themselves, because the small amount of heat that it does produce will dissipate through throughout the surface anywhere where they're not sitting on top of it, and so they can't concentrate enough heat to get burnt on. They're really great. I love them. I've had them for so many years and never had the slightest problem with them. The one thing, as I said, is you do have to make sure that the heat pad is bigger than the animal. As long as the heat pad's bigger than the animal, they can't get into trouble with it, and they're great. Anyway, I can't remember the brand name of it, but they're really nice, and I've got that. So I feed her on top of that, because it also makes a nice surface in which she can't possibly ingest any substrate when she's on top of it. And so what I do is when I'm going to feed her, I put her on that heat pad on the right half of her enclosure, that's the hot side. And every other time I always put her back on the left. So if she gets put onto her heat pad at night, it means one thing, it means she's being fed. And she recognizes this. It's really interesting because like when I put her down on the heat pad on that right side of the enclosure at night, she goes into high alert mode and just looks around and just really, really alert. And then so like, I hold the these days rat in front of her for a short amount of, it never takes her more than about 5 seconds to nail the thing. So, I mean, she's always been a good eater. Her mother actually was a spider, and spiders are by reputation excellent eaters, and I do wonder if it's related to the spider gene, if it's just spider has gone along with being an excellent eater, and she may have just inherited that from her mother anyway, or whatever the thing is. But she has always been an excellent eater, but it never takes anything to persuade her to eat. She goes on high alert, she's looking, and you put a rat in front of her, and usually 1-2 seconds later she just nails that thing. and reliably every time. And now obviously as she gets older, eventually she'll cycle, and then ovulation cycles screw with whether or not they're hungry and so on. So there's that. But yeah, it's interesting how well, because ball pythons have a reputation for many of them not being good eaters, and I do think it has helped having a recognizable pattern to when it's time to eat. Just puts her in food mode so that she just is thinking about food and very ready for food in this moment. And so she's just, I just never have any problems with that. And so anyway, again, another thing, a lot of people do keep ball pythons more in like drawers, and there's less to distinguish in a drawer, to be sure. Rack systems, I mean. But nonetheless, it's worth looking into, I think, especially if you have any trouble with ball pythons. Like, snakes aren't as visual, and I think especially probably ball pythons aren't quite as visual. But like, if you have something you can do that is like a regular, a regular sort of thing, like you only feed at night and you don't normally handle them at night, like something where like something they can clearly see, that clearly hear, etc. In snake discovery, they're click training their rainbow boa that has no eyes, and from what Emily of Snake Discovery said in her videos, that seems to be working at least reasonably well. And so I mean, even clicker training, anything that's like really clearly, easily identifiable. So another thing, like they did with their alligator in Snake Discovery, remember they hold up a red plate, I think it was, like a red frisbee. And so that red frisbee means you're getting fed now. And so their alligator just, doesn't really care when they walk in unless it sees the red plate, and then it hightails it over to where it gets fed. So, I mean, even something like that, like, the equivalent of like ball training, but like, holding up some sort of colorful object. The only thing being snakes being descended burrowing animals, I believe. I seem to recall reading they only have the green and the blue receptors. They're red-green colorblind, essentially. So, like, a bright red thing may not be really the ideal way to go. But something really recognizable that is very obviously unlike anything normal, that means you're getting fed now, might well be a way to help the snake know what is food time, so that when there's no question that now is food time, they will feel more comfortable and less stressed and much more willing to just eat in that moment, because they really know what's up. Because of course, when you get a frozen thawed rodent at the end of tongues, in one sense it's recognizable, but in another sense it's, their temperature, the temperature of a frozen thawed can easily be off. And just sort of lots of things. And so, anyway, I think it's worth trying. My experience with this, and I've only had her for a year and a half. I never really had problems with my previous ball python, the one who died when he was 18, eating. He was always a ready eater, and I didn't do that with him. So, I mean, I don't want to overstate this or claim that this is magic, or that this is the only thing that works or anything like that. Obviously, there's lots that works. But just want to throw this idea out there, because I've been having really good experiences with it. Now, the one thing is, I do make a point, like if my kids are putting her away, to mention you always put her away on the left. Because if you do put her away on the right and then just like stick your hand in front of her, fast moving, warm thing for an animal with heat pits, an ambush predator with heat pits, in that context, when she's been primed to think she's getting fed, is, she gets really excited about hands in that one case. All other times, she is the most docile thing ever. But when she knows she's getting fed in that circumstance, then I've seen her actually take a strike at a hand every now and again, because, of course, it looks like a rat. I mean, especially given that a lot of their sight is actually their heat pits. So your hand kind of looks especially like a rat because you're really rat temperatured. Yeah. And so, anyway, but that one thing aside, as long as you have the discipline to be consistent, and, I have, it really has worked out very well. Anyway, So that's just sort of my experiences. She has been an amazing pet. She's just a wonderful, wonderful snake. I love her, and my children love her, and I'm looking forward to when she's even bigger, but I really enjoyed the size she's gotten because she's big enough to really, like, actually interact with well. You can really feel her presence, and she's actually been, because I've been holding her up with nothing around, I think she's been more calm, but she is actually the most explorative of my snakes, which is kind of amazing that the ball python is actually more explorative. Like when you sit down with her to watch a movie or something, she's just always exploring every which way. I mean, she does have a preference for down and things that she can burrow into, but she always is exploring, whereas the reticulated python doesn't as much. So, yeah, she's a when you hold her with someplace to go rather than like up in the air like this, which I don't normally hold her. She is a great snake. She also seems, it depends on if she's in the mood for it or not, but she often actually enjoys being rubbed under the chin too. There are plenty of times where she'll be going along, if she's in the right mood, where you start rubbing under her chin and she stops exploring and just stays there letting you rub under her chin. So, yeah, she's a great snake. I'm really, really just delighted to have her. She's such a pleasure. And as a general thing, since her personality is not, is her personality, I guess pythonality. But this is an example of what a firefly looks like at a year and a quarter, roughly. She's born in October. Yeah, I mean, I've got to say the firefly pattern, because I mean, I'm not, she's a pet. I'm not a breeder. And so I'm more interested in what does the snake look like as an adult. And so, I mean, she clearly doesn't have her adult coloration yet, but she's getting there. And clearly firefly lasts very well, at least a year and a quarter. And so I've got high hopes that, I mean, obviously, like, her back will darken a bit and be a bit, dirtier and less yellow. Her sides should yellow up a little bit. But yeah, so this is, but I'll be periodically making these to help show what this looks like over time, because I think what they look like as adults is frankly a lot more important than what they look like as babies, and too much of a focus on breeding can I think attract people's attention only to the babies and not to what they look like as adults. So anyway, yeah, hope that was interesting, or at least it was fun to watch the pretty snake. And until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.